Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of what makes this game awesome. The PS Vita is kind of a dead console at this point, which is really sad for me because some of my favourite games actually originated on the PS Vita. One of the ones that really stood out for me was Gravity Rush, because it seemed to really push the hardware to its limits, which a lot of other games didn't really seem to do. Thankfully, it got a port to the PS4, and that gained enough popularity that people decided it needed a sequel. Since I love the original game so much, even though there's quite a lot wrong with it, I want to make a video on this sequel. So today, I'm going to be talking about Gravity Rush 2 and what makes this game awesome. Don't worry, no spoilers. Gravity Rush 2 is a game that I find myself loving 90% of the time and hating the other 10%. For those of you who haven't heard of Gravity Rush before, you play as Kat and her cat, Dusty. Please tell me someone mixed their names up. Dusty allows Kat the ability to make walls and ceilings her floors, to slide along the ground and the walls, also to choose which direction she flies, or I guess technically falls in. The series has a reputation for the amount of freedom of movement that it gives the player, allowing you to fly freely around some massive maps at breakneck speeds. They've put loads more effort into Kat's animations this time, and as you fly around the map, seeing Kat flip and swoop around makes shifting gravity really satisfying. This is a really fun experience that feels fun whether you've played the other game or not, due to the numerous improvements made to the controls, graphics, and fluidity, and how it stands out as its own game. Similar to how you could rotate the Vita to change the direction you are falling in the first game, you can tilt the PS4 controller to adjust the camera while shifting in this game, which can look really nice, and also get kinda sickening if you have shaky hands. One thing I really appreciate about Gravity Rush 2 is how it feels designed to be a fun experience for people who've played the original game, or people new to the series. Technically, you are supposed to have played the first game, as it sometimes references back to characters or places that were seen in the original game. The amount of these references can be quickly summed up by reading a summary of the first game, and considering how good this one is, I think that would actually be quite a viable thing to do. Apart from that, the game is perfectly fine to play for people who are completely new to the series. Now, considering how complicated it can be to get to grips with shifting gravity, the tutorial is a pretty important part of the game. The tutorial in Gravity Rush 1 was pretty decent, teaching you about the ins and outs of shifting gravity, and I actually thought that the tutorials in this game were better, and much faster to the point, teaching you what you need to know in a well-designed level, at least most of them, but I'll talk about that later. And I found myself getting back to grips with shifting much faster than the first game, so I feel that the intro tutorial was really well done, which is nice because it's mandatory, and if you already know about shifting from the first game, it can get kinda boring. The game's storyline revolves around completing 22 chapters of story missions. Considering the amount of side content and how long each chapter lasts, I'd say even when rushing, you'll still get around 12 hours of content, and could have way more than 20 if you did the side quests too, which is pretty good in my opinion. The first 12 or so chapters are pretty much completely separate from the storyline of the first game, based in a new environment entirely. These are pretty fun, and exploring the environment is great, but the storyline really starts to get intriguing after the 14th chapter, I'd say. I really like the storyline of this game, much more than the first one, and while there are a few moments where it can be pretty slow-paced, most of the story missions are pretty fun to do. And I can say that towards the end, the story takes some really interesting turns. The characters in Gravity Rush 2 talk in like a kind of nearly Japanese, it's quite a lot like Sim speak, or whatever it's called. But it can get really jarring at some points. There are a couple of points in the game where I feel like the game should have just been voice acted, considering they had to record all of these samples anyway. But it isn't too bad, I just thought it was worth mentioning that. New abilities are given to you through the whole game, spread well across the game so you always have a new ability to test out when you're flying around the city. Considering that you can also power up Kat using gems found around the map, I think that the amount of character power-ups this time are amazing, and there are even more ways of doing it that I'm not going to cover in this video because the game explains it much better than me. The actual storyline missions and side missions and stuff are a real mess for me though. At some points, I really love the missions, and the amount of depth given to the NPCs and questlines. There's a lot of quests in the main storyline, and all of them are pretty challenging, but there are tons of side quests and challenges that you can complete for gems or compete online with other people. However, some of the less unique quests can quickly blend together into chores, like there's a quest to water people's plants or fetch balloons, and I think there's even one where you have to stand in line to get a crepe for an old man, which isn't exactly the most stellar quest that I've ever been on. I'd say about 70% of the quests were fun and unique to play, setting themselves apart from the first game and adding a much needed change of playstyle, forcing you to rely on stealthy shifting or finding vantage points to take pictures without being detected, which can be really fun, but the other 30% of quests will drag, and it's a very noticeable flaw of the game. The enemies and environments are much more varied than the first game, with some of the new environments really making the game's mechanics shine and being super fun to navigate. The game also has a completely remastered version of Hexville, the town found in the first game, which is even more fun to navigate this time around with heavily enhanced graphics and a much more alive feeling crowd, and even some new parts to the town. The enemies in this game are much more than just the Nevi found in the first game, adding mechs, humanoids, and other powerful characters that really add some much needed variation to the previous game's blanket of identical Nevi. The bosses in this game, again, are quite a big mix for me. Some of them are really interesting, and I think on the whole, the designs of the bosses are really cool, but fighting them can get tedious sometimes, and it's kind of similar with a lot of the enemies in this game. They like to put tons of them in one place and make you fight them for what can end up being 20 or 30 minutes at a time, but some of the bosses in general are really cool to fight. Some of them look cool but can be really tedious to fight, and some of them aren't very interesting designs, but are fun to fight. Also, not all of the bosses are Nevi, so that is a real bonus. The game does reuse a boss 2 or 3 times, but it's not the only boss that you'll end up fighting, and I don't think it ruins the game. But the bosses aren't really the main focus of it, and if you wanted really good bosses, I'm afraid you're not going to get them here. The previous game's gravity shifting has also been expanded on with 3 new modes added to Cat's arsenal: Lunar Mode, Jupiter Mode, and Panther Mode. Lunar Mode reduces gravity, so Cat can jump super high and adds some other maneuvers to make her move faster, as well as changing the gravity kick to a kind of teleport kick, which really changes how you'll end up playing. Jupiter Mode increases gravity, allowing for Cat to gravity slide extremely quickly and attack enemies harder and slower, but it heavily reduces how she can maneuver. Panther Mode allows Cat to use extremely powerful slash attacks, but unfortunately I can't really show any footage of this without spoilers, as you only get this mode late game. All of these modes are unlocked at different points throughout the game, and all of their own tutorial stages. The Lunar and Panther stages are great and do a really good job of teaching you how to use the style through level design. However, the tutorial stage for Jupiter Mode is one of the worst designed stages in the game, having tons of small confined hallways that absolutely destroy the camera and is actual torture to complete, especially considering how hard it is to just move anyway in Jupiter Mode. Just thought it's worth mentioning, for a mode that you'll probably spend about a quarter of the late game as, not being properly taught how to use it doesn't really help. Still, considering how easy it is to fuck up a game like this, I feel they did an amazing job. The soundtrack really stands out for me, featuring some remastered songs from the old game, as well as a bunch of new ones which all sound absolutely great. One place I feel is very important to talk about is the camera. Normally when designing a 3D game, you don't have to factor complete 3D movement in, so I can imagine that designing the camera for this game must have been hell, since you can collide with anything from any angle. I won't defend it, the camera is pretty damn bad, rendering the Jupiter tutorial stage I spoke about earlier nearly unplayable. As you can see, the camera just spazzes out and stops working properly when moving at high speeds and colliding with small objects. And as someone who's very good at placing themselves in 3D space and hasn't had too much trouble with stuff like this before, I can say that some of the camera flunks were enough to leave me saying, "Where the hell am I?" for 3 or 4 seconds after stopping, which isn't good in the middle of a fight. This is annoying for me because sometimes the creator's vision really shines through, and you can see a glorious game, but stages like this just turn it into a frustrating mess. Also, just quickly, the finishes in this game are way cooler than the first one. You can do combined finishes with Raven throughout the game, and they seem to be unique for every character that you fight, which is really cool, so yeah, just thought that was worth putting in. However, I feel that the game's biggest problem, apart from the camera, is that sometimes it can't decide what it wants to do. I specifically remember a few missions that really stood out where the game tried to be something that it just isn't. One mandatory mission, pretty close to the beginning of the game, has you fighting the martial artist Fee in hand-to-hand combat, without being able to shift gravity. This is such a terrible idea because the combat only works because of how little time you'll be spending on the ground, and there isn't enough depth for advanced blocking and dodging. After all, it's a gravity rush game, it's not a martial arts simulator. The fight is really slow paced, forces you to remember stuff and replay the level a few times, which is a key trope of bad level design, and overall is unfairly programmed and designed, heavily giving an advantage to the other character. The stealth missions can also be kind of dumb, and while some are really well designed and I had a lot of fun playing, some can be really hard to navigate and punish you for exploring different ways of doing it, and some are extremely lenient and have hundreds of ways to solve them. The game is also online, unlike the first one, which creates a very different feel. Kinda like Dark Souls, you can see ghosts of other players shifting around town, and you can also challenge other players to various challenge missions, like freestyle gravity racing, which is one of the few challenges I'm actually good at. In fact, just exploring in general is still one of my favourite parts of this game, just like Gravity Rush 1. The whole game just feels more alive, and flying around the area can feel so satisfying, especially with Cat's smooth animations and doing precise maneuvers, which you'll quickly find yourself doing because of how plain satisfying it is. Overall, I feel like this game has done a much better job than the first one of understanding why people actually play it, to feel like a badass gravity shifter, and they've definitely put a lot more effort into that in this game than they did in the first one. However, the storyline missions really don't seem to complement this, and a lot of them feel completely unrelated to what the game is. Like, you could do them even if you couldn't shift gravity, so what's the point of being able to? And that is why I think that everything apart from the gravity shifting in this game stops this game from being amazing. The gravity shifting is really cool, and I still think that just free roaming with the gravity shifting can easily get this game into awesome territory for me. But if the gravity shifting just looks like a kind of gimmick to you, and you think that will get boring after a couple of hours of doing it, then I honestly can't recommend this game to you, because that's pretty much the only reason you'll play it. The storyline missions are good, but they can end up blending together to be chores, and just in general, the game doesn't feel well designed apart from the gravity shifting. I really feel like if they'd made the game open world and focused less on telling this really strict storyline that they wanted to tell, which can get kind of weird at points anyway, then this would have been a far better game. And I just wish they could have done something like that, because then I would have been able to rate this game much higher. So to answer the important question, the gravity shifting, amazing art style, and really cool soundtrack are what makes this game awesome. But the storyline, the camera, the stage design in some places, the enemy design, the enemy placement, and just a lot of stuff really brings this game down from being awesome. I still don't feel like I should call it awful or alright, because it's still good and I still get enjoyment out of it, but I can understand why a lot of people wouldn't like this one as much as I do. So with all that taken into consideration, I would give Gravity Rush 2 a 6.5 out of 10, with 5 out of 10 being completely average. Just thought I'd clarify that because I'm changing how I score games now. I used to count like a 7 as an average, and that doesn't make any sense. So, from now on, 5 out of 10 is average, and I would count this game just a bit above average. It's not amazing, but it's good, and I still have a lot of fun playing it. Anyway, I get that that's kind of a controversial opinion, so let me know what you think of the game down below in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like it, and if you want to see more stuff like this from the channel, make sure to subscribe for more stuff. Also, make sure to check out my social stuffs, the links are in the description and on screen now. I've got quite a few more games that I'm reviewing right now, and hopefully they won't be too long, so I will see you guys in the next video. See you there.